Welcome to Worldview Dilemma. My name is Devin Waldman, and this presentation series will span many videos. This particular video is an introduction to what will be under discussion, and perhaps we can get to the essence of what it's all about. So this meme here, well, it encapsulates the moment quite well, and I'll be sharing a lot of memes throughout the presentation, so thanks in advance to all those who created the memes. But yeah, it's the world is riddled with injustice, and a lot of people treat each other or treat others very badly, and it's added up into this world that's at once heaven and at once hell, right? I mean, because on one hand, you really can't imagine a planet more abundant, more beautiful, with everything we need, with more diversity in terms of life, in terms of animal life, in terms of plant life, in terms of human life, just exquisite beauty, waterfalls and rivers and mountains and trees, and you could go on and on with describing the wonders of this world, right? And you can look out with telescopes and not find another planet quite like this, right? So there's that, but then and there's all the beauty that people co-create as well, right? It's not all madness and suffering, but then there is a whole lot of unspeakable, well, it is speakable, it's just I was going to say unfathomable, but we're here to fathom it, right? So it's just the kind of crimes committed against people just really can perplex someone who can't imagine doing such things. Like the things that people do to each other in this world, the slave systems that have been created, the exploitation and the brutality, is just mind-numbing, really. So that's the other side of things, of course. So we have this kind of strange duality in that sense, and there's also this kind of widespread uncertainty of what to do about it, or at least even if we do agree that the problems are dire, we may totally disagree on what the solution would be. So, and then, someone might say, hey, well, you don't really have the power to make any kind of changes, so you might as well enjoy your life. And I'm not here to say that anyone shouldn't enjoy their life, right? But at the same time, tuning things out, even if the bombs aren't falling on you right now, tuning things out only really would add to that that accumulation of negligence to act, right? So really, whose responsibility is it to do something about this insane world, right? This highly unjust place. Whose responsibility is it if not yours, if not each and every one of ours? Otherwise, what are we saying? That the people in power it's their responsibility to steer the course of human history to a better outcome, and we're going to trust them to do that, and people should just abdicate that responsibility and trust that people in power will do a good job steering it to a less unjust place, in spite of the track record of people in power, committing crimes against humanity again and again and again. So all of that to say, one can understand why nihilism is a thing, why despair is a thing, why the urge to tune everything out, because the problems are so immense. But there is something, I think, quite convenient about imagining that it's someone else's responsibility, someone in power, to make the change happen, when, in fact, we are all co-creators of this reality. And we could choose to do something different. It certainly wouldn't be easy to get there from here, but it is nevertheless a choice, right, of what we choose to do with our lives, and what we contribute our energy to. And so, this whole presentation series will kind of be going through various sticking points in the worldview, right? Because the worldview is so powerful, and if our worldview is unjust, and if our actions and our words are unjust as a result of that, unjust belief system, then of course that injustice will ripple and affect others and influence their thoughts, which will influence their words, their behavior, right? And so, throughout this presentation, we will be deliberating over various worldviews and how they come into conflict with one another. And yeah, so let's move on. So let's just kind of summarize what is taking place. And this is an incomplete list, but it provides somewhat of an overview, or a decent enough overview of what is going down, but again, it's not a complete list, so I'm sure I'm leaving things off of it. But there are multiple genocides happening, of course. There's slavery in forced labor camps, and of course this is referring to the earth itself, all over the world, right? There are multiple genocides, slavery in forced labor camps, sweatshop labor, unfair wages, unfair conditions, people working jobs under duress, spending their lives doing things they don't want to be doing. Obviously that's very common as well. Millions of missing children, human trafficking, sex trafficking, poverty, food shortages, starvation, environmental degradation, widespread enslavement of animals, poisoned food, water, and air, widespread addiction, widespread psychological results from living in such a world, tyrannical laws passed by governments, stolen lands, systemic racism, bigotry towards people's differences, domestic abuse, child abuse, police brutality, widespread debt, governments themselves in a combined $300 trillion in debt, corporate greed, extraction of land, labor, and resources, tax money used as bailouts and subsidies for the most powerful international banks and corporations in the world, mass incarceration, war on drugs, war on terror, torture sites, private prisons, illiteracy increasing in certain parts of the world, deforestation, perpetual war, I should have written, plastics in the ocean, radioactive sludge pouring into bodies of water, homelessness, division, psychopathic politicians, barreling towards an AI smart city police state dystopia, medical mishaps constituting one of the leading causes of death, plants being genetically altered to withstand more toxic assault, widespread disagreement on the cause of all these problems. So what that points to is that, we belong to a species that is not free. And of course, it's a caste system, so some people are much more comfortable than others. Some people are much more privileged than others, wealthier than others, experience way less of the violence, do not experience the brunt of that list that we just went through compared to others, and may have, a high degree of autonomy within their lives, right? And yet they belong to a species which in the aggregate is not free. And so this system of privilege really is, of course, well, one would have good reason to think that it is designed so that some people are comfortable, or enough, just, a critical mass of people are comfortable enough where they will not see the system as antagonistic to them, and therefore will not resist it and will not unite with those who it is most brutal towards. But privilege and freedom are not the same thing, right? Because true freedom would not involve having a ruling class, if we're going to be honest. True freedom would not involve living in a caste system, right? If you're only concerned with your comfort, right, that's something else. But freedom is not something that is, yes, you can experience freedom on an individual level, but when we're talking about freedom itself, which is a mutual thing, freedom itself would not involve having a caste system, right? It would not involve living within a caste system, a system of manufactured scarcity, a system where, a handful of billionaires own the equivalent as the more exploited half of the human population combined. 4 billion people own the equivalent combined as a handful of billionaires, according to mainstream sources like Forbes, right? This kind of level of imbalance, clearly that is a global caste system. So, when we diagnose it as such, I guess it's just to say that it's important to come to that understanding as far as what to do about it, right? If it's true that the species you belong to is not free, isn't that a really big problem? Wouldn't that demand a lot of attention, a lot of care, a lot of energy working towards liberating ourselves from that and uniting to that, to do that? Even if we can't agree on everything, we never will, but could we at least agree that people are made to be free, and that this system is not about freedom or justice? The system in place is really a gangster system that does a lot of harm. So anyway, let's move on. So if the bombs feel far away, press your ear to the ground. The whole earth cries for justice. So this gets back to the point, well, even if the bombs are not falling on you, they're falling on your fellow human beings. Do you not feel some kind of tug, some sort of responsibility? Are your tax dollars funding the bombs being dropped on people? Do you not feel some sort of tug about that, some responsibility to do something about that, to oppose that? Have you thought it through that you're forced to pay for bombs being dropped on someone else under the threat of incarceration yourself, which would mean that you're not free, right? Because, of course, people fund the government under coercion, that if they don't give the government money, they will be fined. They'll have to give more, which will cost even more of your labor. And if you don't do that, well, then you could be dispossessed or abducted or incarcerated, right? So people, how could we consider the human race free when, like, the even the wealthiest people on and not the wealthiest people who on earth who run the world, but let's say in among people who make a lot of money but don't run the world, among that class, well, they're funding all kinds of harmful things that they really ought to spiritually oppose, and in some cases probably do, right? So imagine you are forced to fund other people's harm, or even your own harm, or really the harm of everyone, and if you don't, you'll be forced to give them even more of your energy, and if you don't do that, you could be thrown in a cage, right? And that could happen to a celebrity, it could happen to an athlete, right? And yet they're the ones who we're all supposed to aspire to be like, right? Because they have a lot of money and a lot of opportunity, right? But they're not even free. So all this would be so important if unity could ever come to pass, right? Because obviously the basis for uniting would be a mutual bondage and a mutual liberation, even if that bondage looks different for different people. There's both physical freedom and mental and spiritual freedom as well to consider, because a lot of people might be very comfortable and yet mentally not very free. So there's a lot of work to do. If freedom is where people want to go, and I don't know where else one would want to choose. What if it's not freedom? What are people choosing? So if freedom is the goal, then of course that is a very daunting thing, considering how far we are from that as a species. Again, speaking at the level of the species, there's just an unending amount of work to be done, and I guess a lot of people again are caught in a cycle of trusting the abuser to be the provider, the abuser to be the protector, and the abuser to be the leader. So, and that keeps the bombs falling, because people are willing to drop the bombs. People are willing to vote for the people who drop the bombs. People are willing to fund those bombs being dropped, and the people who are being bombed. What are they supposed to do when so many people are willing to go along with it? And instead we want to talk about what this leader said or what that leader said, but really we are co-creating this. Even if it is under duress and coercion, people could unite and say no, thank you. We're going to share our own energy voluntarily and directly with one another. We won't be going through this insane, violent third party to, we're not going to rely on this power structure to steer the course of human history any longer. So that kind of mindset could could really starve the war machine in the long run. But it's not to make any predictions or say we're anywhere near the numbers that would take. It's just to say, well, there's nothing impossible about that. Regardless of the likelihood, it's not impossible. So as long as it's possible, then it's worth trying. Right? And so the real revolution is the evolution of consciousness. So because what this all points to, all these problems that we've gone through, all the fact that these problems are so far-reaching and so ubiquitous, suggests that a lot of people are complicit in that and participating in that, either at an ideological level or for a paycheck or in some other way. Someone is willing to carry out the orders of the ruling class. Right? We can't just all put it on the ruling class. The ruling class, they don't do the killing with their own hands. So who are the people doing most of the murder on Earth? Well, it's the people who work for the ruling class. It's soldiers. And somebody raised those soldiers and didn't teach them, unless the children went against what they taught. But someone didn't properly share the knowledge to not enter into the police or military and work for the ruling class. But if that dynamic were to change, and more parents and more teachers and more people were telling the youth from the get-go, don't join these harmful institutions and murder people on command, and work for these institutions that have been invading and conquering, right? That would certainly go a long ways if we could shift the approach to education to be less, memorization and regurgitation based, and more about engaging with the free will and the critical thinking and the conscience of all the young people in school, right? Or to even move away from the compulsory model of education and a state-curated model of education, a top-down authoritative model of education. Of course, that would do wonders in altering things for the better if we could be wiser, if we could be more knowledgeable, if we could be less bigoted, if we could be less willing to harm for a paycheck, and willing to fund it even under coercion, but still acquiescing to that rather than uniting against it. Of course, all of this really gets down to the need for the people, us, the masses, to evolve ourselves. Because no system can come along and fix the problem of people being mean-spirited, people being bad people, abusive people. Abusive people will create any number of systems that are unjust. And the system can't fix that. It can't make people just. It can't make, the government can't make you a good person. That's not what it does. So no system of like whether it's a left-wing kind of socialist-based system or a right-wing system, no system is going to fix the problem here and here. That somehow these forces are not aligned in a lot of us who are willing to do the most heinous deeds to others, right? And in so doing also really harm ourselves. And something's got to shift, right? Some evolution is necessary among enough people. And of course, many are pointing out that it's been happening, that it is already happening, that people are evolving, and I would imagine that's true, right? I don't really know how it compares to ancient times or whatever. It seems like probably we're in a very similar place, in terms of where the collective consciousness is at. But maybe an evolution in consciousness is occurring, right? But is it occurring fast enough, and can more people get involved to see to it that the evolution quickens, to avoid all the worst outcomes that are definitely in store for the species if the evolution does not happen fast enough? Because obviously we're dealing with a technological capacity that does seem to make our time to respond to such a system finite, right? Because at some point all the police will be AI robo cops and AI police dogs, and at some point the technology will be such that it will be even a harder hole to climb out of. So it's not like there is an endless amount of time to get our act together and unite against and co-create something else. And again, it may seem very unlikely to someone that this could ever happen, and I'm not here to say it will happen. Again, I'm just saying that it's possible. That's all I know, that it's possible, and so one can at least do what one can to try. Because another coexistence is possible, and there's no need for things to be the way they are. There's no need for the hunger and starvation and the endless war, right? There's not. If we could break free from this system, which would take an evolution of consciousness, we would, of course, could free ourselves from this artificial scarcity. Where the power and wealth is really hoarded, and the poverty and the economic warfare is perpetrated. So, in any case, there's no getting out of this system, I don't think, without first evolving ourselves, because really, how else to do it? Doesn't the mind and heart have to break free first? Don't we need to change something within the worldview and then speak and act from there? So that more or less covers what I wanted to speak about in the introduction, and we'll get into some of the other points as we go. Okay, thanks for joining.